All right, good morning. We'll go ahead and get started for today. And today is the 11th. And so what my plan for today was I was going to finish up talking about chapter 11 or chapter 10 in the text. And let me try to dim that a bit. So on the syllabus itself, you'll notice that, and I know, and just to sort of come back, there are a couple of errors in the syllabus. I know that was pointed out on Monday that the exam is supposed to open on there's a date here. It's going to open on the 30th, not the 23rd. But that's one thing I did not catch. And the syllabi just kind of created sort of by committee, and I think some of this is a fragment of and a leftover of the COVID days when there were activities not being due and people would just work on their own. But obviously we're meeting in class, and so but I'm going to finish chapter 10, and then I want to do some more of the exercises from the back of the chapter. This is just an effort to try to get you familiar with what you might expect to see in the homework quiz and bonus, and I pushed the due date on those back to the 15th, and if you ever want to see what that looks like, just to kind of confirm for yourself what's happening here, I'll try to pull this up here on. So if you go to coursework content, and then for this particular segment, coursework content, kind of slow, and then the assignments link, and notice the due date I put on. Well, that's not it. Is it? Chapter 10 assignments. There we go. Homework quiz and bonus on the 15th. Okay. So the syllabus won't change, but I'll change the due dates. If the due dates change, I'll try to give you ample time, and even though it's always going to be in your favor, I'm not going to move any due dates up or anything, but if they change for all kinds of reasons, they do change because of the fact that the syllabus itself was sort of projected to cover a certain number of topics in a certain time frame. And the reality is we have holidays and other kinds of things going on, so that's really the issue there. Okay, so syllabus won't change, but it'll change on the checklist and also on the assignments themselves. So if we talk about where we are here, we're in pretty good shape with regard to covering the content that is due for up to the first exam, which is not for another 3 weeks or so. So I'm going to finish chapter 10 today, and I want to get into chapter 11, and I'll probably get about 15 minutes or so into that. And I say that only because there's another section, that's a Tuesday, Thursday section, and they're pretty much right where you all are. And we got through the rest of what I was wanting to do in chapter 10 yesterday, and then got into a little bit of chapter 11. So I think that's kind of where we'll sort of be here for that. So, okay. So any questions for me about anything before we get going? Anybody on the Zoom call? I don't think we have anybody on the Zoom call at the moment, but if you do, let me know, and we'll be more than glad to answer your questions. I wanted to go back to chapter 10, and let's see here a second. And I want to pull over some of the problems and exercises that we're going to be doing for this chapter. Okay. So if you look on the screen here, I did one on Monday. It was brief exercise 10.4, and I mentioned then that there's a second half of that I didn't get to on Monday, and it's the same set of data. And obviously what I've got to work with here is obviously we're trying to project and record on the screen and all that. So I'm going to have to take this back up, but this was the original problem using the data. This is 10.4, and it's in the e-text. I think it's on page 1039 in the e-text. It's a rural area company, and they've got just a certain bit of extracts from a balance sheet. This is obviously not a full balance sheet. All it has is receivables, inventory, and total assets. And we were asked to do a horizontal analysis, which we did on Monday. And now in 10.5, it asks for a vertical analysis. So let's do that. Let's do a vertical analysis. And remember, in this chapter 10, we were covering three main topical areas: how to do horizontal analysis, which is also called trend analysis. It allows for us to see over time what's happening with an organization, and we can compare information, whether it's line item information from balance sheets or income statements or financial ratios. Vertical analysis, which takes into account what's going on in a particular time frame, and then also ratio analysis, which, and we'll get to some of the ratio analysis examples here in just a second. So let's do the vertical analysis on 10.5. So this is a brief exercise 10. Oops, there's no ink in that one. So let's try a different one. And brief exercise 10.5. Okay, and I was kind of concerned when I looked that it was about the visibility on the Zoom replay, and it looks like everyone can see this reasonably well. At least if you want to zoom it up and whatnot, you should be good. So this asks for vertical analysis from the information on 10.5 for rural area companies. So what do we got here? We've got 2 years, year ending 12/31/27 and 12/31/26. And we're being asked to do vertical analysis on accounts receivable. Okay, those are the trade receivables from selling goods on credit, inventory. So these are really the two biggies in current assets. But rather than compute anything related to current assets, it's asking for total assets. And so we're going to present this both from a perspective of dollars and then also percents in both cases. Dollars and percents. Now remember, what vertical analysis does is it employs a technique called common sizing. And what common sizing is a way, in the case of a balance sheet, of taking every line item on the balance sheet that's of interest and expressing it as a percentage of some value. And that value is total assets. Okay. And whether it's even if it's not an asset account, even if it's a liability or a shareholder's equity account, it still is a percentage of total assets. And in the case of an income statement, that value that is keyed off of is net sales. That is sales minus returns, allowances, and any sales discounts. So this is what we're doing, is we're sort of presenting these as percentages. And then vertical analysis can be combined with horizontal analysis to do some interesting things. So let me, I'll just pull up the information here and just sort of recreate the problem itself. For 2027, we had receivables of 460, inventory of 780. Total assets of 3,164,000. And then for 2026, we had 400,000 in accounts receivable, 650 in inventory, and total assets of 2,800,000. Okay. Right off the bat, the easiest thing to do here is to simply, first of all, since everything is a percentage of total assets, this is going to be 100%. That is relatively straightforward. And obviously this is a very scaled down sort of model of what you would do in real life. You would probably have dozens of accounts that you'd be common sizing, but this just is an effort to try to get you up to speed as to what we're doing. So let's do 2027 first, and we'll just do the math here. And by the way, since we've got 3 zeros we can chop off, let's just sort of do that to make our math easier. You can put in 460,000 into your calculator and 3,164,000, or you can chop these 3 off, and you're going to obviously get the same answer. And you're going to get here an answer of 0.145, which is 14.5%. So accounts receivable in 2027 were 14.5% of assets. For inventory, it would be 780. Here I will chop those 3 zeros off just to kind of keep it simple. 3,164, and you end up with a percentage of 0.247, which is 24.7%. Obviously, these don't add up to 100% because we're not capturing every asset on the left side of the balance sheet, but that gives you an idea of what's happening there. Now, again, one thing that I have talked about a lot in this course, and I think I'm probably going to talk more about, is the idea of, hey, what does this all mean? What does 24.7% mean? Is that important? Is it good, bad, whatever? And I think it's important to know that these numbers in and of themselves are sort of neutral. I don't know that you could say, oh, it's good or bad. It makes sense when we compare these figures in context with other numbers, and even with, and we've talked about this before, in combination with peers in the industry. specific peers in particular or with the industry as a whole. And then we can sort of make judgments as to what's going on. And this is sort of setting the table for what we're going to be doing later in the course, and that is evaluating management performance by using numbers. And that's really what managerial accounting is at the bottom line, okay? That's 2027. Let's do 2026 real quickly. Accounts receivable to assets ratio, 400,000 to 2,800,000. Math is relatively straightforward. Your calculator can easily do this. Again, the math is not going to be your problem in this course. Not that you're going to have a problem, but math is not something to overly worry about. Accountants are not mathematicians, despite what some people might think of as bean counters and whatever, right? And then if we do the inventory to assets ratio, 650 divided by 2,800,000, and we end up with a percentage there of 23.2% or 0.232. And so that's how you do it. That's all you have to do on that one. You know, there's nothing really more that's needed there unless the question asks for it. This is the kind of thing that you might see in the Wiley Plus resources for any particular modules, homework and quiz and bonus, these sorts of things. If we were asked to make an assessment of this, you know, we could say, well, you know, the accounts receivable to assets ratio was stable between 1 year and the next. Inventory went up a bit as a percentage of total assets from 1 year to the next. And that would be really all that we could really say about that particular information, this limited extract of data, okay? And in reality, you probably have more accounts and make more judgments, but this is really what's going on. Again, though, I do want to stress when I talk about what kind of judgments we'd be making about it, it would be sort of oftentimes in combination with horizontal analysis that, you know, not just doing the comment sizing within the vertical analysis within an accounting period. And remember, balance sheet is a snapshot at a certain point in time, 12/31, 12/31. But horizontal analysis kind of takes you over the motion picture of what's been going on with this company. And that's a lot of what financial analysis is sort of geared around is to answer the question, what is going on? Okay. All right. Any questions about number 10.5? Okay. I want to go to scroll down a little bit. And this is 10.10. I know that this is really a little bit awkward when I'm not going to obviously keep this up on the screen very long. 10.10 is, I'm just going to pull it so I can look at it. But if you go, obviously you've got the book and you can look at it, but it says, suppose selected condensed data are taken from the balance sheet, most recent balance sheets of Bob Evans Farms, which actually is a real company, Bob Evans Farms, and we're asked to compute the current ratio and comment on the results. So why don't we do that? Let's look at keep this down here. Let's look at I'm trying to find my screen to make sure that you guys can see what's going on here. So let's look at this. So this is 10.10. This is a very straightforward question, and it just asks for us to do the current ratio for 2 years. Okay. So brief exercise 10.10. And I don't know whether or not this is actual. It says, I know Bob Evans is a real company, whether or not this is the actual, well, I can't do real information because it's 2027, 2026, but you kind of get the idea that it doesn't really matter. Remember what the current ratio is. The current ratio is simply this, it's current assets divided by current liabilities, okay? And this is one of the prime ratios that fit into this category of financial ratios that we call liquidity ratios. Liquidity, again, is simply a term that describes a company's ability to generate cash to satisfy short-term obligations. That's really all that is. And as I noted in class, and I think it's worth considering, is the idea that the current ratio probably is not as important these days as what it used to be. I think I told the class that back in the day, back in my day, I guess you should say, we would always say that you should have 2-to-1 coverage, current assets to current liabilities. And I don't know that any company that I look at on a routine basis has that high of a ratio. Mostly because companies are able to generate cash in all kinds of different ways that didn't used to exist before. And many companies, many very, very strong, very liquid companies have a ratio. Not only is it not 2 to 1, it's not even 1 to 1, it's less than 1 to 1. And they feel like they can fend for themselves. So let's do the math here for 2027. We've got current assets of 80,260, or probably there are 3 zeros cut off, it's probably 80,260,000, but the math is going to be the same. Divided by 245,805, and we're going to get a current ratio of 0.33. And I know that sometimes your book will express this as in ratio form 0.33 to 1. It's the same thing. We usually just simply capture whatever the figure is, so 0.33 for 2027. For 2026, again, and we're given the information, so it's not particularly, it's 870,874, or what is probably the case, 70,874,000 divided by 326,203. And here you're going to get a ratio of 0.22. Okay. So, and then the question, so those are the answers. That's how you compute a current ratio. And sometimes you might have a question that says, compute current ratio, and you've got a listing of accounts that are given cash, accounts receivable, inventory, and you'll have to compute current assets in order to begin, or current liabilities, which are things like accounts payable, wages payable, interest payable, these short-term liabilities. You'll have to add those up. That is, you'll have to add these to get to these, and that's perfectly fine. But then once you get those, the math is relatively straightforward. So the second part of this question is interpret the results. Okay, well, let's do it. Well, first of all, I guess the good news here is the current ratio has gone up from 1 year to the next, okay? From 0.22 to 0.33, that's good. Remember, as a rule of thumb, and I try to give you a sort of rule of thumb guidance on all of these ratios, the higher the better, with the caveat that if you have a 10 to 1 ratio, it's probably excessive. You probably have too much something, inventory, accounts receivable, something is going a little bit wrong probably, and maybe you could invest cash differently. So there's that caveat, but the higher the better generally. But these are pretty low current ratios. My commentary on that would be, I would be a little bit concerned about this company's ability to meet short-term obligations. If I were an external user, an investor, or a lender, I would say, what are you guys doing to try to get this a little bit closer to at least 1? I think I would be concerned about that. What may need to happen, and I'm going to put on my banker hat from back in the days, that it may be a case where you guys, that is the Bob Evans Farms, the company, are a little bit thin on liquidity. Do you need some sort of injection of something to pump up your current assets? That would be what I would recommend. Borrow money, write a check, owners, issue new stock, whatever you need to do, right? I just saw a report this morning that GameStop, a company that's been in all the financial press for the past couple of years for all kinds of different reasons, are issuing new stock, which is pretty unusual because a lot of companies are buying back stock these days. Now they're issuing new stock, but it can happen. That would be one way to raise cash if this were a publicly traded corporation. Okay, so that's 1010. That's really all we have to do. Are there any questions about that one before we move on to a couple of other items here?
You said borrowing money is one option. Wouldn't that increase their current liabilities too?
Well, it might, but here's why it might not. I would recommend, if I were a lender, that if you do what's called a permanent working capital loan, which means, okay, let's say we need to lend them $100 million or whatever, then it's not all going to be coming due in that current year. Maybe we put it on a 3-year or 5-year term.
So it's a liability without a current
liability. Now, only part of it is the current liability.
Right.
The current portion that matures. The rest moves down to the long-term liabilities, and you pump them. And that's a very common financing arrangement where the company needs money. And if they're in the business of borrowing from banks, they would go to the bank and say, we need a permanent working, and we would call it a permanent working capital loan. It's a long-term loan, and we pump up this, and this doesn't rise as much, and we raise that current ratio. That would be one solution. Another solution would be, and it may be not available to them, is to issue more equity, more stock to investors. But then when you do that, and by the way, I bring up the GameStop example because they're issuing a ton of more stock. The stock just did a nosedive. I haven't looked at it since I've left the house, but it's because they're watering down people's equity by issuing new shares. So that might not be an option, but there are alternative ways of doing that. One thing about current ratio, and I've been saying this before, and I think it's right, at least, not just because it's my opinion, but because I think it's right, is the fact that I don't know that you have to have well above one coverage, but I think you should be somewhat close to it because things do happen. Your textbook talks about this idea of current liabilities and these coverage ratios as being the ability to meet unexpected needs. And I don't really like the adjective unexpected because, yeah, there are things that are unexpected, but what about expected needs? That's probably more something to plan for. And obviously, if you've got a 0.3 current ratio, then you already expect that you're going to have to raise cash somehow. So, okay. All right, questions about that before we move on. Let me do a couple more. I want to do brief exercise 10-12. And I like these brief exercises at the end of the chapter because from a learner's standpoint, from your all standpoint, you can click on the answer and get that answer. And, and what's good about it is not only do you get the right answer, but oftentimes an explanation as to why the other answers on this multiple choice scheme are not right. Like, why would this not be right? And that's oftentimes, I think, a pretty useful way to sort of approach this is, why is this not the right answer? And frankly, in the world of academic publishing, there are oftentimes wrong answers are put there because there's an anticipation of how would somebody get to this particular wrong answer, this particular wrong turn might be taken. Okay. All right. So 10-12 is, let me just pull it up here, and you can obviously look at it on your own. I won't put it up on the screen. 10-12 is the following data were taken from the financial records of Meidorf Company. Okay. And so you've got columns for 2027 and columns for 2026. And by the way, one thing I should say is, and I didn't think to mention it before, but a lot of these questions and problems that you'll get from the Wiley site, sometimes you get information you don't need, and it's not necessarily designed to confuse, but it can serve that purpose. A lot of times people will say, well, what am I supposed to do with this figure? It doesn't seem to go here. And if it doesn't seem to go, it probably doesn't. And I know sometimes people take wrong turns when they're looking at information that's included that's not necessary. That is a very common thing. And it's not, I don't think the intent is to deceive, but it is part of the logic of what accountants do is sort through things, numbers usually, to try to figure out what is happening. Okay. So in this case, I bring this up in this particular case because we've got an intermediate step we've got to do here, and that's compute cost of goods sold. Because in 10-12, what it's asking for is, for these 2 years, the inventory turnover and days in inventory. Inventory turnover and days in inventory. So this is brief exercise 10-12. Let's talk real briefly about what inventory turnover is. Inventory turnover is a number, it's not a percentage, not a dollar figure. And it's basically this, it's taking the cost of the stuff that we have sold, which we call cost of goods sold, divided by average inventory. Okay, divided by average inventory. So that's essentially what is what's happening here. And when we talk about average inventory, or average really anything in this course, we're talking about taking beginning inventory plus ending inventory quantity divided by 2. Okay, and then cost of goods sold is the value on top. Now the question is here, and this is an intermediate step that we've got to figure out. How do we get to cost of goods sold? Okay. Well, let's remember this from 2110. And if it's been a while since you took equals 1, then I'm going to sort of give you a bit of a blast in the head. Cost of goods sold, if you are using particularly a periodic inventory system, where you have to go back and compute cost of goods sold. The formula is beginning inventory plus purchases. Together, the sum of those is something called goods available for sale. Okay. And if you subtract ending inventory, you get cost of goods sold. Okay. And just to sort of walk through this, and I know that and I wouldn't sort of blow through this and say, okay, well, that's all well and good, because this particular methodology is going to come up again and again in this course, when we deal with all kinds of, say, ending values of things like raw materials or whatever, this is a very common and very logical methodology. What did we start the year with in inventory? Plus what we bought equals what we had to sell all year long during this entire accounting period. The things we didn't sell then, obviously, is still here. We would not include it as cost because we don't recognize the cost of inventory until it's sold. It's an asset until it's sold, then it becomes an expense called cost of goods sold. So what we didn't sell then is the difference between what was here and what didn't sell, and that's cost of goods sold. So that's where cost of goods sold comes from. So if you walk through both of those years, you have beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending inventory, and you have cost of goods sold. And in the case of 2027 here, and let's just do 20, and it's asking for 2 years, 2027. We've got cost of goods sold at 4,780,000. Where did that come from? Well, all right, let's go to the information given. For 2027, we've got beginning inventory of 960,000. We've got purchases of 4,840,000. Add those together and you get goods available for sale. And that's going to be what, 5,700,000 some thousand, whatever that is, minus ending inventory. And if you want, I can do the math if you want, just to kind of do this. So beginning inventory 960, okay, and I'll do it here. Maybe I should probably just do it just to help out here. Plus purchases, which were 4,840,000. Now I didn't bring a calculator, so hopefully somebody here can do the math just to confirm my numbers, because I did compute the this, but I didn't work the problems out on this. But this should give us goods available for sale of let's see, what is that? It should be hold on. Wait a minute. Should be 5,008,000. Is that what it is? 5,800,000? Is that what it is? Okay, minus ending inventory of 1,020,000. So 1,020,000. My lines weren't straight there, and I'm not used to doing these things on the board with a light shining on me. So here you have the number here is 4,780, and that is the cost of goods sold. Okay, makes sense. Does that ring a bell from 2110 as to how we get to cost of goods sold? All right, so we've got cost of goods sold in the numerator because we're being asked here in part A to compute inventory turn. Part B is really easy, and so A is the biggest issue. Divided by average inventory. Well, average inventory is going to be beginning plus ending inventory. So that's going to be 960,000 plus 1,020,000 quantity divided by 2. And if we work out the math on this, and let me be able to read my own handwriting here. So what do we get? Well, the numerator is 4,780,000. 4,780. And what is the sum of 960 and 120? It's 1,980,000 divided by 2. And then if you take 1,980,000 divided by 2, then we have the final value for the denominator, and that's going to be 990,000. From there, you simply do punch this in, 4,780,000 divided by 990,000. And you're going to get a number of 4.8 roughly. Okay. And what is it? 4.8, what is it? And we can look for a little X because it's the number of times. Remember what inventory turn is saying is this is the number of times our inventory on average turns over. That is, our inventory completely replaces itself on the shelves or on the floor, whatever, 4.8 times. Right? And that doesn't mean that there isn't faster moving inventory, there isn't slower moving inventory, but this is the average of all inventory, okay? For whatever it's worth. And we said that when we first started talking about this ratio, we said that higher the better generally, and I think that's not that's not really a qualified statement, because I think most companies that have inventory want inventory to move faster, not slower. Inventory is problematic in a lot of ways. Inventory sitting around doesn't do anything for you but tie up resources. It's got to be protected. It's going to be kept under lock and key, and kept dry and clean and all that. So obviously companies want, if they had their way, they could take inventory in at 9 in the morning and sell it by 5 p.m. and have zero inventory at the end of the day. Obviously that's not realistic, but you kind of get the idea. Okay. So that's 2027. So let's do 2026. And I've gone ahead and computed cost of goods sold using the same methodology. And if you want, you know, I can go over that for anyone who wants, but I computed cost of goods sold 4,541,000 divided by average inventory, which was beginning plus ending, which we're given in the problem, so we don't have to compute that. 840 plus 960, quantity together divided by 2. Okay, which equals 4,541,000 in the numerator. These two guys together, 840 plus 960 together, should be 1,800,000 divided by 2. That is not particularly complicated. 4,541,000. 1,008,000 divided by 2 is 900,000. And so the final calculation here is you're going to get a ratio of about 5, roughly 5 times those. Okay. And that's part A. That's all you have to do in part A is to compute inventory turnover. And what it really is asking us to do here is to make an assessment of how quickly inventory is moving. Part B of this is relatively straightforward, and that is simply, what is part B asking? Part B is saying, okay, this is a number of the number of times it turns over, but the days on inventory is simply taking that turnover ratio and divide it into 365. Pretty simple calculation. So you take 365 divided by 4.8, and you're going to get 76, roughly 76. 76 what? 76 days. And that's the number of days on hand for the average bit of inventory. The average unit of inventory is on our shelves or on our floor for 76 days in 2027. In 2026, same calculation, 365 over the 5 ratio here, and you end up with 73 days. Okay, and that's the answer to part B. And so what does this tell us if we were asked to make an interpretation of this? Then, because the question is, what conclusions concerning the management of the inventory can be drawn from this data? Well, one thing we could say is that inventory is slowing down a little bit. That is, it was 5 times per year in 2026. It has gone to 4.8 times. It's the average length of time on our books is 3 days longer. So what conclusions? I would say, well, if anything, that's the wrong direction. Would it be super cause for alarm? I don't know, probably not, but you could easily say, and I would be one to probably say this, that 1 year does not a trend to make. But what if this goes on for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Now the days on inventory goes up to 90 days, 120 days, whatever. And you're far exceeding the inventory turn ratios for your peers and for the industry as a whole. That cannot be a good thing. Under any kind of perfect world, I don't know how anyone can say that's good. So obviously companies want inventory to move faster as opposed to slower. It's been a long-term trend in the business world to move inventory faster and not slower. And particularly, by the way, in manufacturing, which is going to be sort of an orientation of this course throughout a lot of the modules that we'll be looking at. And there's a big emphasis on manufacturing and managerial accounting, which in itself is a little bit controversial because the economy is moving away from manufacturing. Not that it's not growing, but it's other parts of the economy are growing faster, like service industries, technology, healthcare, and whatnot. Okay, that's 10-12. So everybody, any questions about that I can answer for you all here? And if you're on the Zoom call and you want to, we can hear you if you want to say something. You don't have to. I'm not I don't want to call anybody out, but you can feel free to do that. I don't know that anyone has done that yet, but you can feel free. Some sections we have lots of people lie on the live call, and there's lots of back and forth, and that's fine. I try to keep this as informal as possible, or you can put something in the chat box. Up to you. Okay. All right. Let me see here. I want to go to the exercises, not the brief exercise that we just covered. I want to go to exercise 10.7 in the text, and let me just read this for you real quickly, and I'll do this problem. So, and I'll try to give you the page number, although I don't know that. I'm showing 10.39 in the e-text. I don't know if that's right. It doesn't seem like it's updating, but let's look at it. So 10.7, exercise 10.7, E10.7, in the back of the chapter is Nordstrom, which is again a real company, operates department stores in numerous states, selected hypothetical financial statement data in millions for 2027 are presented below. And notice that when I say in millions, we're chopping off 6 zeros, okay? I'm going to go ahead and erase this. And and the reason we truncate these figures by cutting off 3 zeros or 6 zeros or whatever is just to make it easier to read. It's obviously there's a lot of rounding, but it makes it easier to present, easier to read than getting a lot of numbers on the page. And obviously, as we get closer, further out to the right, the less meaningful it can be. And this is why we don't have cents, because it's just too much for us to put pennies on that. Even tax returns, we don't even put pennies on anymore, even for individual returns. So in this case, you've got this data. What is it saying? It's for 2027, and it's got end of year and beginning of year. And you've got selected amounts of information there in order to look at. And so it's asking us, and it's given us also, not in the columns, but net credit sales were 8.2 billion, and cost of goods sold was 5.328 billion. And net cash provided by operating activities is 1.251. Now that last bit of information is not necessary for this question. Cash provided by operating activities is a cash flow statement concept, and we don't really even get into that much in the financial accounting piece. We definitely don't get into it very much in this course here. So you got to, again, kind of look at what is important and what's not important and kind of exclude what's not important. So in this case, you've got, so what are we being asked to do here? We're being asked to compute current ratio, accounts receivable turnover, average collection period, inventory turn in days in inventory. Well, accounts receivable turnover, again, that's the other big item in the current assets category. It's computed very similarly to the inventory turnover. Beginning and ending receivables, though, are the numerator, are the denominator in that, and net credit sales are the numerator there. So let's do these for the selected year. This is exercise 10.7, and we want to do the current ratio first. And that's, again, a fairly easy one. In fact, I think we're given in the problem all the information we need. Total current assets for the end of the year, we are looking at the end of the year, is 4,054,000, or because we're chopping off 6 zeros, it's actually 4 billion, but we're going to cut off those numbers there. Divided by current liabilities of 2014. That's going to give us a current ratio here of 2.01. Okay, that's the current ratio for that information, and that's pretty straightforward. Nothing too tricky there, I don't think. Okay. Accounts receivable turnover is a little bit more involved, and let's do that. Accounts receivable turnover. Again, what is accounts receivable turnover? It is essentially this. It's taking net credit sales, and that sounds like it's a lot of things involved here, but remember, you would only create an account receivable when you sold a good to a customer on credit. And we're not talking about some long-term installment plan. We're talking about short-term billing where that customer is going to pay an invoice. Now, in this particular example, I know this is hypothetical information. Nordstrom is a retailer, and a lot of their sales are not credit sales. I mean, in particular, you can't go to Nordstrom and say, these pair of shoes, can I pay you in 90 days? And yet walk out with the shoes. That doesn't work that way, right? So it's probably overly hypothetical, but in business-to-business transactions, it's extremely common to do a credit sale. That is, I'll ship you 2 truckloads of whatever and pay us in 30 days. These are the invoice terms, in which case it creates a receivable and a net credit sale to go along with it. So that's only going to be applicable in that case. It's net credit sales then divided by average accounts receivable. Okay. So what do we got going on here with net credit sales? We are given in this particular example, and it's down at the bottom of that question. Credit sales were 8.258 billion. Okay, so 8.258 divided by average accounts receivable, which in this case, what is the information that we're going to be using here for this particular example? Okay, well, we're going to take beginning accounts receivable plus ending accounts receivable, both of which are given in the problem, and it's going to be here in the denominator 2035 plus 1942 quantity divided by 2. And one thing, I know I've said this and I don't want to belabor this point, but when we talk about average something, we're just taking beginning and ending divided by 2. It's to smooth out fluctuations throughout the year. Sometimes at the end of an accounting period, you might have maybe reduced inventory or reduced receivables. And so this is a way of smoothing out those fluctuations. A lot of companies have inventory cycles where they ramp up and dial down, and they're pretty extreme. And the same goes with receivables. So if you wanted to, you could take, I don't know, the 15th of every month, add up receivables divided by 12. Or, and I've actually seen this, companies take it's ending accounts receivable at the end of every day, add them up divided by 365. That would be a pretty good average, pretty accurate average. In this case, though, we're going to keep it relatively simple. It doesn't maybe look as simple as it could be, but it is. So what do we have here in the numerator? So the denominator. Numerator stays the same. What is 2035 plus 1942? It's 3,000, or actually 3 billion. 3 billion divided by 2. Divided by 2. So you're going to have 8258 over the quotient here is 1988.50, and you're going to get a number of 4.2, and that's going to be the accounts receivable turnover. Okay, 4.2 is the accounts receivable turnover. And then what else is it? It's asking us to do the average collection period. Okay, well, average collection period, and I'm just going to put it over here because it kind of goes along with this. Average collection period is like the average days in inventory. It's how long these receivables are on average hanging out there. And we're taking that turnover ratio, dividing it into 365. Now we're going to get somewhere around 86.9. 86 point what? 86.9 days. Okay. And one thing I can tell you is unless it's very customary in that industry, that's a pretty slow collection period. 4 times turnover per year, 86 days is an average time to receive payment on something you've already shipped or provided. That's fairly slow. Having said that, sometimes industries have different customs, and particularly when you've got a lot of big buyers and small sellers, the big buyers, unfortunately, the law of the jungle applies, and they'll try to squeeze them by going very slow on their own payables, which means the receivables, the small sellers have got to just deal with it and live with it, right? The only other time when we see very slow receivables are, unfortunately, government contractors who sell mostly to the government. And the government has got a reputation for paying. They don't usually default on their obligation, but they're often very slow. And government does have that reputation. And I know that when I say government, obviously we've got a big government, federal government, state governments, and all that. So it's hard to generalize, but it is kind of a thing that if you're a government contractor, sometimes you don't get paid very quickly, and it's just the nature of the bureaucracy that you're dealing with. Okay. All right, and 2 other things here. One, we did the inventory turn in days inventory before, but let's do inventory turn here, and that's going to be a number, right? So inventory turnover is going to be cost of goods sold over average inventory. And in this case, what are we given for this information here? Let's see, we've got to compute cost of goods sold here, it looks like, right? So, which I've done just to sort of save time, and we get cost of goods sold for this year, just 1 year, it's 5,328. And the average inventory is taking beginning inventory plus ending inventory, which is 898 plus 900, 20 divided by 2. I don't know if you're like me, you can look at these and say, these are only separated by 2 numbers, and so the middle value's gotta be 899, but let's just do the math here, 5328. And we simply put these together, we're gonna get 899, okay? And then, to compute the final value, we're gonna get a figure of 5.9 times inventory turnover. And then to do the days in inventory, it's 365 divided by 5.9, which is going to give you about 61.9 days. And sometimes these are rounded; these are not always taken to a decimal point, but about 61 days as days in inventory. Okay. So that is how we do that one. And all of those are really dealing with liquidity issues, okay? Dealing with liquidity issues. How liquid is the company? How quickly are they turning inventory over? Inventory and receivables both, just to sort of tie this off here, are both problematic from the standpoint of the fact that the longer they're out there, the worse it is for the company. Companies generally would love to have receivables turnover fast and inventory turnover fast, and that's good. And in fact, it's a strategy that some companies employ, particularly a lot of retailers on the inventory side. That is, Walmart is a classic example of a company that moves inventory extremely fast, and to the point where sometimes the inventory and by the way, inventory is whenever it hits your books. So even if it's not on a shelf ready for sale, if it's in a warehouse somewhere, it's an inventory. But they want to move that quickly. And so their turnover ratio has got to be pretty high in relation to other industries like jewelry stores, appliance dealers, car dealers, boat dealers. That inventory just doesn't go flying off the shelves. And it's bigger ticket items, and so why would it? And it's a limited number of buyers. Obviously everybody buys shampoo, but not everybody buys a riding mower, right? So you get the idea. Sometimes inventory moves faster. That's why these numbers don't mean anything until we put them in context with the broader picture of what the industry is all about. Okay. Any questions about that one before we? I want to do one more, and then I want to sort of get out of it. And I wanted to address this this issue of profitability ratios. So hopefully everyone in the room's got this. Obviously, if you're watching on video, you can always go back and look at that. And I want to do exercise 1010, and it deals with selected profitability ratios. Okay, and this will be the last that we do on this. And if you have questions remaining about chapter 10, which are very common, just give with me individually. I'll be in the office all afternoon at main campus, and so you can call me, email me, whatever. Email is probably the best way. We can arrange a time to talk, or you can come by the office if you happen to be around main campus. I'm going to be there, but let's do 1010. So what is exercise 1010 asking us? Let's take a quick look here. Okay, it's selected hypothetical comparative data for Barnes & Noble, another real company, and it's got information for 2027 and 2026. It's asking us to do 5 ratios: profit margin, asset turnover, return on assets, return on equity, and gross profit. Now, in my mind, the two that are really critical here are part A and part E, profit margin and gross profit rate. Those are both expressed as a percentage, and they sound like they're the same thing, but they're not. And we talk about profit margin, we're usually talking about sometimes called return on sales. That is, of all the sales we do, how much of that falls to the bottom line as net income after tax that's available for us to do whatever we want with. That's different than gross profit, which is not net profit. Net profit is what I just talked about. And that's how much of every dollar of sales did it cost us to generate it? What have we cleared on every dollar of sales? If I sell snow cones for $5 each and it cost me $1 to make a snow cone, that means I've cleared $4 per snow cone, right? I don't know what the market on snow cones is, but you get the idea, right? And obviously the fatter, the larger the markup, the better. And markups, that is price versus unit cost, are all over the place for all kinds of different goods. But the percentage return is the way that people in the financial world compute these percentages, and they can make comparisons. So let's do profit margin first here. So profit margin, this is, in other words, net profit margin, okay? Which in this case is simply going to be net income, okay? And in the numerator, net income is 75.9, I guess billion, because they've chopped off 6 zeros here. So 75.9 billion, and it's going to be divided by net sales, which is 5,128,000, or 121,000. So, all right, so again, net income, which is a dollar figure, obviously, divided by net sales. It's so, in other words, this is return on sales. So the numerator is 75.9 billion. I'm sorry, 75.9, I guess, million, divided by 5.1 billion, I guess is the answer there, right? All right, so to do the math here, let's just simply plug this in. And the math, again, is going to be not an issue, I don't think. And you're going to get a value of 0.15 or 1.5%. All the way down, if you want to just convert the decimal to it, I'm sorry, the decimal to percentages to move the decimal, 2 points to the right, slap the percentage sign on it. Now, as to this profit margin, that's not a very high profit margin. For every dollar of sales, and we only get to keep a penny and a half. It's not particularly high, and I'm not saying that that's. I'm not passing judgment, but I guess maybe I sort of am. That's not a particularly high profit margin, which tells us that that is not a particularly profitable business overall in comparison to other things maybe. The second ratio is the turnover of assets. Asset turnover ratio is what's going on here. And simply this is you're taking net sales divided by average assets. So the net sales here is this guy, right? So it's net sales divided by average total assets. Okay. So net sales for this year is 5121.8 divided by average assets, which is given here because it's got what again the average beginning plus ending divided by 2. We've got beginning assets of 2, and this is ending assets 2993.9 plus beginning of 3249.8. Again, we're chopping off some zeros here in order to keep this a little bit manageable. Quantity divided by 2. And you're going to get here, the numerator is the same, 5121.8. 2993 plus 3249 is 6243, I believe. 0.7 divided by 2, which is going to reduce to 3121.85. All I'm doing is just simply working the math problem really on the denominator side. And at the end of the day, we're going to get a value here of 1.64 times assets turnover. And it tells us how many dollars of sales assets can generate. One thing about this, just to kind of bring a little bit of realism into the class, which is, I think, always necessary, is I don't know that asset turnover is that important of a ratio, and it's becoming less and less important. And one of the reasons why is because I guess back in the day when a lot of our economy was dominated by manufacturing, where there were lots and lots of assets, property, plant, equipment, huge plants and lots of equipment, lots of machinery, lots of vehicles moving stuff. Asset turnover was probably a pretty big deal. How efficiently are we using all this stuff, these long-term assets? And today we're moving, not that that part of the economy is not growing, but it's not growing as quickly as service industries and healthcare. And yes, I know healthcare's got equipment and whatnot, but it's mostly service, technology, software business does not use much in the way of assets. So it's not quite as critical. I would not put this in the same category as some other ratios. Take that for whatever you like. So C, return on assets, ROA, okay? ROA is simply this, it's simply net income divided by total assets or average assets in this case. And sometimes you'll just take an ending assets, but the example in the text is using average assets. This is going to be expressed as a percentage, okay? And remember, one thing that I had said before is that ROA is always going to be less than ROE. And in some ways, ROE may be a little bit more meaningful if you compare the returns, percentage returns from one to the other. In this case, we've got net income, which is this, right? 75.9 divided by average assets. And can I just kind of jump to the chase here? Because we've already computed this average assets here. So can I just kind of edit this and move forward without doing this again? I think you kind of get the gist if I do that, right? And you're going to get 0.024 or 2.4% return on assets. Okay. We kind of knew it was going to be low because with the ROR, the return on sales, which is what this is sometimes called, is also low. Return on assets is also pretty low, really pretty low. And but it's going to be more meaningful. I think a better judge of profitability is probably ROE, which is basically net income. Now we would take out preferred dividends, but there are none, so it's just going to be -0. So there are no, and divided by average shareholders' equity. And again, stockholders' equity, and if you might remember this from 2110, stockholders' equity is really composed of three main elements. Number one, common stock, which is the initial issuance of stock. Any kind of additional paid-in capital, like companies will buy back stock, resell it, and you've got a premium over the what's known as the par value, which is just a arbitrary number. And then you've got retained earnings. Retained earnings is a big one. And if there are preferred shares, then preferred is also another category. There are no preferred shares here. And those are the big three categories in stockholders' equity. Stockholders' equity is a concept that only applies to corporations, but that is our focus in college accounting courses, usually publicly traded corporations. Okay, so in this case, what do we got here? We've got net income, which is a value that we have been looking at before, 75.9, right? So that's pretty straightforward, and it's going to be return average equity, which in this case is going to be beginning plus ending stockholders' equity, 921.6 plus 1074.7 quantity divided by 2. You're going to get, let's just do some work on the denominator here. That's going to be 1996.30 divided by 2. 75.9 over, it's 998 point. I'm gonna get my glasses here. I know some of you are probably working this. 998.15. So from here, just a simple punching it into the calculator, ROE is going to be 0.076 or 7.6%. Okay. Again, ROA is always less than ROE, and the reason for, unless the company has zero liabilities, which is pretty unusual to have zero liabilities. ROE, if there are no liabilities, which I guess it's possible, then ROA and ROE are going to be identical because you're not going to use stockholders' equity. You know, it's all going to be stockholders' equity is going to equal total assets. Pretty unusual. So ROE is going to be higher. One thing that I think may be useful at times to look at in this particular measure is what is a dollar going to return to me as a stockholder? If I've got $1, and I want to compare this to all the possibilities of things I can do with $1, if I want to get a return on it. If I don't spend it and I want to save it, I want to get a return. What can I get? And probably the most basic option would be, say, a savings account, where maybe I can get 4% per year, annual interest. Okay, is that good, bad? Well, it's pretty good considering it's safe. It's not going to, you know, I'm not going to lose money. I'm going to get a 4% return versus an investment that's going to yield 7.6%. That does not mean my stock is going to go up by 7.6%, or that I'm going to get dividends plus a rise in stock price of 7.6. It's just a hypothetical return on your money. And stock prices do correlate with returns over very long time periods. In the short run, all kinds of crazy, weird, wacky stuff can happen to stock prices, as we have probably seen now in the last few years. But that kind of gives you an idea. 7.6%, as a rule of thumb, would that be considered high? And I would say no, that is not considered very high. Probably it is probably not as high. And I know some econ textbooks will say that a company, regardless of what industry they're in, should probably strive for about at least a 12% return on equity. Now that could be judgment, I don't know, it could be rule of thumb, whatever, it doesn't really make any difference. Okay, a couple more here, and I think I'm probably not going to get to chapter 11 today, which is okay, it's not a problem. So let's do E here. E is gross profit rate, okay? Sometimes you will hear this called gross margin, okay? And this is expressed as a percentage. And by the way, in the business world, when managers talk about margins, and all the things that are going on with margins being compressed, margins being expanded, margins being squeezed, whatever, they're usually talking about this thing here, gross profit. That is, for every dollar, whatever it costs us to make that good, how much are we able to mark it up? And that residual that we're able to hold on to after paying the cost of the good per unit is considered gross profit. Okay. So what is the gross profit percentage? Well, first of all, it's going to be we got to compute gross profit in the numerator, which is simply net sales minus cost of goods sold, right? Net sales minus cost of goods sold, divided back into net sales again. And hopefully I'm not running off the screen here for those looking at the video. Let me try to adjust the camera here just a bit here just to make sure that it's I'm picking up the rest of that. So okay, so that's what's going on there, is you've got to figure out what is the gross margin, okay? And again, any company I think would probably prefer to have a situation where they are reducing cost of goods sold, expanding net sales, in other words, making bigger that margin. So let's do the math here for 2027 for this company. We've got net sales of 5,121.8. It's really 5.1 billion, but we're obviously shortening this 3540.6. That's cost of goods sold divided back into this guy again. Okay. And let's do a little bit of work on the numerator here, and we're going to get in the numerator that's going to be 1,581,000,000. I think it's 20, right? Yeah. Divided by this net sales 5121.8. And you're going to get a profit rate here of 0.309 or 30.9%. Gross profit, or is sometimes called gross margin. And I bring up the term gross margin. Gross margin usually refers to the percentage. Gross profit usually refers to the dollar figure. But in this case, the text is saying gross profit rate, which is the same as saying gross margin. And for every dollar of sales, 30 cents or so is what we have cleared. That is, whatever good we're selling, it only cost us 61 cents or 60 some cents, 69 cents to generate 31 cents of sales, of net profit. That's of gross profit. That is not net profit, because net profit then you take out all your other costs, which are considered to be indirect costs, like salaries or rental expense, insurance, all these things which are not related to product cost, which, by the way, is where we're going to be starting. Chapter 11 is talking about what costs are product costs and what costs are not product costs. All this is saying is we get about 31 cents for every dollar of sales. We have cleared that, right? We have a 31% gross margin. But from there, we got to take out salaries and all these other things that do not relate to the product itself. And when it comes to cost of goods sold, one of the things we're going to be doing throughout this course is we're going to be sort of drilling down into where this number comes from. Because up to this point, we've only computed cost of goods sold from just the standpoint of beginning inventory plus purchases, yada yada. But we're going to talk about, okay, what if we're making the product? Because up to this point, I know in accounting one, we're dealing with merchandising operations where the goods are already done. But now we're going to be going backwards along the value chain in 2120 to say, what if we're making the goods? Then we have cost of goods sold starts with this whole business of what all goes into the cost of goods sold. And we'll introduce a figure called cost of goods manufactured. Now we're going to do that very soon. I thought maybe we'd get into it today, but I think it's probably best that we don't launch into that right now, okay? So gross profit is 31.9, and that's really all that we have to do in that particular question. Is that a pretty good gross profit? I don't know, probably. Although I can tell you that these percentages are wildly all over the place, everywhere throughout the economy. And I have and could probably pull up for you some examples of gross profits throughout the economy, and they're just really all over the place. Contrary to what maybe people believe, and I think that probably accounting courses add to the confusion here, because I think people get the idea that we just take whatever it costs us to make a good, and we just simply mark the price up. And that's how we arrive at the price. And yet that's sort of backwards. The price is what was the price of anything? The price of anything is what? Just shooting from the hip, it's what? The price is what someone's gonna pay for it. And then we gotta figure out how to make that and sell it at that price, knowing we may or may not have control of the price. And what is it gonna cost us to produce that? If it costs us a lot, in other words, we have a pretty small gross profit, we may not want to do that. Or if we're already making it, maybe we decide not to do it. And that's a decision that goes to managerial accounting. We're going to see a lot in this course. One example I really liked is a company that makes several kinds of tennis rackets. And yet they're all not, the margins are all over the place because people want to pay different prices for those. And so the question is, do we keep making this particular kind of tennis racket, or do we cut it out and stop doing it? And companies make these decisions all the time. We don't want to do this anymore. We want to get out of it because it's not very profitable. Our money can be deployed elsewhere to get a better return on equity by doing something different than what we're doing now. But if there are very fat margins, then we want to do that. And the information I pulled up, and if I remember, I'll try to bring this for you on Monday. But some of the biggest margins in the economy really are in the technology area right now. Networking, software development, app development, all these things. Well, one reason why is the unit costs are extremely small. I mean, it's mostly direct labor because there's not much in the way of material. Software isn't a material; it's intellectual property for the most part, and that's far and away the most profitable part of the economy. And that's where a lot of the investment dollars are sort of flowing to, and away from things like retail. In fact, we have seen retailers just wither and die. JCPenney gone, Sears gone, and more to follow probably, right? Even Starbucks is closing stores. So you get the idea, the economy is moving away from lots of assets to anything that will generate a return without using a lot of assets. Okay, so anyway, that's a little bit of extra additional content, but that's 1010. That's really the last one I wanted to do. So I think I've got about 3 minutes, but I think that it's a pretty good place to sort of stop. Does anybody have any questions for me about anything regarding chapter 10 before we get into chapter 11? I'm just going to check to make sure that nobody's put anything in the chat box here. Give me just a second. It doesn't look like there's anything there. So, okay, we come back Monday. We'll start on chapter 11, which gets us into managerial accounting, and it's going to be all managerial all the time. This last chapter here, this chapter 10 was really what would go into chapter or 2110, but we decided to even out the chapter count to 9 chapters. Was it 9 and 8 or something like that, and to make it a little bit more manageable. So this is going to be covered on the first exam. This is all that is covered on the homework quiz and bonus for this week. If you've already done it, great. You can, and by the way, you can always read ahead. All the materials laid out for you. The only thing that's not available are the exams, but you can work ahead if you like. Some people do. And meantime, you might want to take a look at chapter 11, which will start on Monday. Okay. All right. You guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday.